Alexander Mercer's private jet touched down on the runway of a small regional airport 300 miles from the nearest city that would recognize his face. The relief he felt was immediate, like shedding a skin he'd been forced to wear for too long. At 34, he had built Mercer Enterprises into a tech empire worth billions. But what good was all that money when he couldn't buy the one thing he craved most: anonymity? "We've arrived, Mr. Mercer," his pilot announced over the intercom. "Pleasant Ridge, population 4,000, just as requested." Alex gazed out the window at the modest airport, if it could even be called that, with its single runway and tiny terminal. There were no paparazzi waiting to snap his photo, no business associates hoping to corner him for a deal, no women attempting to catch his eye for the sake of his fortune. Just open sky and distant mountains. "Perfect," he murmured to himself. He had given his executive team exactly 3 months before he would return to the chaos of his normal life. 3 months of peace in this tiny town where, according to his research, most people didn't even have Twitter accounts, let alone follow the business section of major newspapers. The scandal that had forced this retreat still burned in his mind. A former girlfriend, if 6 dates could constitute a relationship, had sold a completely fabricated story to the tabloids, claiming he had promised marriage, a position in his company, and had then cruelly discarded her. The story was absurd to anyone who knew him, but the public loved nothing more than to see the mighty fall. His PR team had advised him to lay low while they handled damage control. Alex stepped off the plane wearing jeans, a simple gray t-shirt, and sunglasses, an ensemble that would have shocked the business world accustomed to seeing him in custom Italian suits. His normally styled dark hair was slightly longer, and he'd grown a short beard. In the mirror that morning, he had barely recognized himself. That was exactly the point. A nondescript black SUV waited on the tarmac. The driver, an older man with a weathered face, nodded respectfully, but showed no sign of recognition. "Mr. Martin Lewis?" the driver asked, using the alias Alex had arranged. "That's me," Alex replied, settling into the comfortable anonymity of his temporary identity. "Thank you for meeting me." "Not a problem, sir. The house is all set up, about 20 minutes from here. Beautiful spot, if I do say so myself." The driver loaded Alex's modest luggage he had deliberately packed light, and they set off down a winding country road. The landscape opened up around them, rolling hills, dense forests, and glimpses of a lake in the distance. The tension in Alex's shoulders, a permanent feature of his life in New York, began to ease. "Is there anything you need to know about Pleasant Ridge?" the driver asked, glancing at him in the rearview mirror. "Just the basics. I'm hoping for a quiet stay." "Well, you've come to the right place for quiet. Town center's got all you need: grocery store, hardware store, a couple of nice restaurants. People are friendly, but mind their own business." The driver chuckled. "Most excitement we get is the annual Harvest Festival, coming up in about a month." "Sounds perfect," Alex said, meaning it. The house was more than he expected: a modern cabin-style structure nestled against a backdrop of pine trees, with large windows offering views of the surrounding wilderness and the lake below. It was luxurious without being ostentatious, exactly what he had requested. "Your rental car is in the garage, stocked with groceries for a few days," the driver said, handing over a set of keys. "The property manager left a welcome package inside with local information. Will you be needing anything else, Mr. Lewis?" "No, this is perfect. Thank you." Once alone, Alex toured his temporary home, feeling a sense of lightness he hadn't experienced in years. No assistants hovering nearby, no phone constantly buzzing with messages demanding immediate attention. Just silence, interrupted only by the gentle rustling of leaves in the breeze and distant bird song. He stood on the back deck, taking a deep breath of pine-scented air. This was what freedom felt like. For the next 3 months, he wasn't Alexander Mercer, billionaire CEO and recent tabloid target. He was just Martin Lewis, a man taking some time for himself in a quiet mountain town. Little did he know that his carefully planned escape would soon be disrupted by something he hadn't factored into his calculations, something as unpredictable as it was inevitable. After a restful first night, the best sleep he'd had in months, Alex woke early, energized by the mountain air and the prospect of a day with absolutely no obligations. He decided to explore the town, curious about the place that would be his home for the coming months. Pleasant Ridge lived up to its name. The town center consisted of a charming main street lined with brick buildings, most dating back to the early 1900s. Shops displayed hand-painted signs, and flower pots hung from old-fashioned lampposts. It was almost too picturesque, like something from a travel brochure about small-town America. He parked his rental car, a sensible mid-range sedan rather than his usual luxury vehicles, and walked along the sidewalk, nodding politely to the locals who passed by. No one gave him a second glance. The anonymity was intoxicating. A small café called the Book and Bean caught his eye. The window displayed a charming arrangement of books and a sign advertising the best coffee in Pleasant Ridge. Given that it was probably the only coffee shop in Pleasant Ridge, Alex smiled at the claim but decided it was worth trying. The interior was warm and inviting, exposed brick walls lined with bookshelves, mismatched comfortable-looking chairs and tables, and the rich aroma of freshly ground coffee. A few locals were scattered around, some reading, others engaged in quiet conversation. At the counter, a young woman had her back turned, arranging pastries in a display case. Her dark honey blonde hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she wore jeans and a soft blue sweater. "Be right with you," she called over her shoulder, her voice warm and melodic. "No rush," Alex replied, studying the menu board. When she turned around, he was momentarily caught off guard. She was strikingly beautiful, but not in the polished, calculated way he was accustomed to in New York. Her beauty was natural and unassuming clear skin, with a sprinkle of freckles across her nose, expressive hazel eyes, and a genuine smile that transformed her entire face. "Good morning," she said, wiping her hands on her apron. "What can I get for you?" It took him a second to remember why he was there. "Coffee, black, and, what would you recommend from the bakery case?" Her eyes, a fascinating mix of green and gold, assessed him briefly. "You're new in town." It wasn't a question, but Alex nodded anyway. "Is it that obvious?" Pleasant Ridge isn't exactly a metropolis. New faces stand out. Her smile widened. "But don't worry, we're friendly to outsiders. Usually." There was something refreshingly direct about her manner. No artifice, no agenda. She wasn't trying to impress him or figure out what she could gain from their interaction. It was nice. "I'm staying for a while," he offered. "Rented a place up by the lake." "The Henderson property? Beautiful spot." She moved to pour his coffee. "And to answer your question, the blueberry scones are fresh this morning, my grandmother's recipe." "Sold," Alex said, finding himself smiling back at her. As she prepared his order, he noticed the small details, the way she hummed softly to herself, the careful precision with which she wrapped the scone, the easy confidence in her movements. This wasn't someone putting on a show. This was someone entirely comfortable in her own skin. "I'm Natalie, by the way, Natalie Adams. I own this place." She slid his coffee and scone across the counter. "Martin Lewis," he replied, the alias now feeling strangely dishonest as he spoke it to her. "Nice to meet you." "Welcome to Pleasant Ridge, Martin." She tilted her head slightly. "What brings you to our little corner of nowhere? We don't get many long-term visitors." The prepared story slipped easily from his lips. "Taking a sabbatical. I needed some time away from the city to clear my head, maybe do some writing." "Ah, another writer seeking inspiration in the mountains." She nodded sagely. "You're in good company." We've got at least 3 retired English teachers and a poet laureate somewhere in town. Alex laughed, genuinely amused. I'll try not to disappoint the literary community. Just buy books and drink coffee and we'll get along fine. Her attention was drawn away by the chime of the door as new customers entered. Enjoy your breakfast, Martin. Hope to see you again. You will. He found himself promising, though he hadn't planned to establish any routines during his stay. He took his coffee and scone to a quiet corner table by the window, where he could observe the gentle rhythm of the town while remaining inconspicuous. The scone was indeed excellent buttery and filled with plump blueberries, and the coffee was surprisingly good, far better than he had expected from a small-town café. As he ate, Alex watched Natalie interact with her customers. She knew everyone by name, asked about family members and specific events in their lives. There was nothing performative about it. She genuinely cared. It was a stark contrast to the transactional relationships that dominated his world in New York. He finished his breakfast and was preparing to leave when Natalie approached his table, carrying a book. "Since you mentioned writing," she said, placing it in front of him. "This is my favorite book about finding inspiration. Consider it a welcome gift." The book was a well-loved paperback titled The Art of Seeing Finding Stories in Everyday Life. "That's very kind," Alex said, genuinely touched by the gesture. "Thank you." "No strings attached," Natalie replied with a smile. "But if you hate it, you're obligated to come back and debate its merits with me. House rules." "I accept those terms." As he left the cafe, book in hand, Alex realized he felt lighter than he had in years. There was something about Natalie Adams, her directness, her genuine warmth, that had punctured the defensive bubble he normally kept around himself. It was refreshing, if slightly unsettling. He spent the rest of the day exploring the area, hiking along a well-maintained trail that offered spectacular views of the surrounding mountains and the lake below. The physical exertion felt good after months of being confined to offices and meeting rooms. That night, sitting on his deck with a glass of wine, he opened Natalie's book and began to read. It was insightful and unpretentious, much like the woman who had given it to him. As he read, he found himself thinking about the Book and Bean and its owner far more than he should be thinking about a local cafe he had visited exactly once. "Just coffee," he reminded himself firmly. "Nothing more." But even as he said it, he knew he would be returning to the Book and Bean tomorrow, and not just for the coffee. Over the next 2 weeks, Alex fell into a routine that centered, perhaps inevitably, around the Book and Bean. He would arrive mid-morning, after the breakfast rush, order coffee and whatever pastry Natalie recommended that day, and spend a few hours reading or pretending to work on his non-existent writing project. The cafe became his sanctuary, a place where he could observe small-town life without feeling like an intruder. And Natalie, with her easy conversation and genuine interest, became something he hadn't expected to find in Pleasant Ridge: a friend. She never pressed him for details about his past or his life in New York, accepting his vague answers with a nod and a change of subject. There was an unspoken understanding between them that he valued his privacy, and she respected that boundary. On a particularly quiet Tuesday morning, when Alex was the only customer in the cafe, Natalie brought over a fresh pot of coffee and sat down across from him. "So, Martin Lewis, mysterious writer from the big city," she said, refilling his cup. "Are you going to tell me what you're actually running from? Or should we continue pretending you're here for the creative ambiance?" Alex nearly choked on his coffee. "What makes you think I'm running from something?" She gave him a knowing look. "People don't rent expensive lakeside properties in tiny towns for 3 months, unless they're hiding from something. Or someone." She held up a hand when he started to protest. "Don't worry, your secret's safe with me. I'm just curious." He considered his options. There was something about Natalie that made him want to be honest with her, even if not completely. "I needed a break," he finally said. My life in New York was becoming overwhelming. Too many demands. Too many expectations. I came here to remember who I am without all of that. Natalie studied him, her hazel eyes thoughtful. That's the most honest thing you've said since you got here. It's complicated. Life usually is. She smiled, not pushing for more. Well, whatever you're taking a break from, I'm glad it brought you to Pleasant Ridge. You're good for business. Mrs. Harrington thinks you might be a famous author researching a new book, and she's been coming in every day, hoping to catch you in the act of creation. Alex laughed, relieved by the change of subject. Sorry to disappoint her. I'm definitely not famous. Famous or not, you've become part of the local scenery, which reminds me there's a community potluck at the town park this Saturday. You should come. The invitation caught him off guard. He had been careful to maintain a polite distance from the town's social activities. I don't know. Come on, it'll be fun. Good food, live music from our surprisingly decent local band, and you'll get to meet the eccentric characters who make up our little community. Consider it research for your writing. The look of genuine hope on her face made it impossible for him to refuse. All right, I'll come. But I'm warning you, I'm not much of a cook. Store-bought is fine, she assured him with a laugh. Just come. 7 o'clock at the Lakeside Pavilion. Later that day, as Alex hiked along his now favorite trail, he found himself looking forward to the potluck with a mixture of anticipation and nervousness. He had spent the past 5 years avoiding exactly this kind of casual social gathering, preferring the structured interactions of business meetings and formal events, where everyone had clear roles and expectations. But there was something about Natalie Adams that made him want to step outside his carefully constructed comfort zone. Her authenticity challenged his practiced detachment, her genuine interest in others not for what they could offer her, but simply for who they were, reminded him of a way of connecting that he had long since abandoned. Saturday arrived with perfect early autumn weather, warm sunshine tempered by a cool breeze, the trees just beginning to hint at their coming color change. Alex spent an embarrassing amount of time deciding what to wear before settling on dark jeans and a blue button-down shirt that his personal shopper had once told him matched his eyes. He stopped at the local grocery store to pick up his contribution to the potluck, a selection of cheeses and crackers that required no cooking skills whatsoever, and arrived at the Lakeside Pavilion just as the event was getting underway. The scene that greeted him was like something from a movie about idyllic small-town life. Strings of lights had been hung from the pavilion's wooden beams. Tables were covered with checkered cloths and laden with homemade dishes, and a small group of musicians was setting up on a makeshift stage. People of all ages milled about, greeting each other with the easy familiarity of those who have shared a community for generations. Alex hesitated at the edge of the gathering, suddenly feeling like an intruder. He was considering a strategic retreat when a familiar voice called his name, or, rather, his alias. Martin, you came. Natalie was walking toward him, a wide smile lighting up her face. She was wearing a simple summer dress in a soft green that brought out the color in her eyes, her hair loose around her shoulders rather than in its usual practical ponytail. For a moment, Alex forgot to breathe. She was beautiful not in the calculated, photoshopped way of the women who typically populated his world, but with a natural, unaffected grace that seemed to glow from within. I said I would, he replied, finding his voice. I brought cheese. Not very imaginative, I know. Perfect, she said, taking his arm with easy familiarity. Come on, I'll introduce you to some people. The next hour passed in a blur of introductions. Natalie guided him through the crowd, seemingly knowing everyone's name, family history, and personal interests. She had a gift for making connections, finding common ground between Alex and each person she introduced him to. Martin's a writer, she would say, or Martin hiked the North Ridge Trail last week. creating instant topics of conversation that ease the potential awkwardness. To his surprise, Alex found himself enjoying the interactions. These people had no agenda beyond simple friendliness. Their questions about his work were motivated by genuine interest rather than calculation, and when he deflected with vague answers, they accepted it without suspicion. "You're a natural at this," Natalie said as they finally made their way to the food tables. "At what?" "Mingling. For someone who spends most of his time alone in that big house, you're surprisingly good with people." Alex laughed. "I've had practice. My work involves a lot of networking." "Mysterious writing requires networking?" Natalie raised an eyebrow, the teasing glint in her eye making it clear she still didn't buy his cover story. "Everything requires networking these days," he replied smoothly. They filled their plates and found a spot at one of the picnic tables. As they ate, the local band began to play a mix of folk and country music that perfectly suited the setting. The music was surprisingly good, and the atmosphere grew more festive as the sun began to set, casting golden light across the lake. "So, what do you think of our little town gathering?" Natalie asked, leaning close to be heard over the music. "It's nice," Alex admitted. "Different from what I'm used to, but nice." "Different good or different bad?" "Different good. Definitely good." She smiled, pleased by his answer. "You should come to more local events. There's a farmer's market every Sunday morning, and the Harvest Festival is coming up in a few weeks. It's our biggest event of the year." "I'll think about it," he said, though he was already certain he would go if she was going to be there. As the evening progressed, the band switched to playing dance music, and people began clearing an area in front of the stage. "Dance with me," Natalie said suddenly, standing and holding out her hand. Alex hesitated. Dancing was not part of his plan for anonymous small-town life. "I'm not much of a dancer." "Neither am I," she admitted with a laugh, "but that's the beauty of small-town events. The bar is set very low. Come on, one dance won't kill you." He couldn't refuse her, not when she was looking at him with that mixture of challenge and hope in her eyes. Taking her hand, he allowed her to lead him to the makeshift dance floor. The band was playing a slow country ballad, and other couples were swaying together in simple, uncomplicated movements. Alex placed his hands carefully at Natalie's waist, maintaining a respectful distance between them. "I won't break, you know," she said softly, stepping closer and resting her hands on his shoulders. The scent of her perfume, something light and floral, enveloped him as they began to move to the music. It had been a long time since Alex had danced with a woman like this, without the calculated maneuvering of a social climber or the practiced moves of a professional date. There was something profoundly honest about the way Natalie fit against him, the way her eyes met his without artifice or agenda. "Thank you for inviting me tonight," he said, his voice low. "Thank you for coming. I'm glad you did." The song ended too soon, transitioning into something faster. They separated slightly awkwardly, both a little breathless from something more than physical exertion. "I should probably check on some of the older folks," Natalie said, though she seemed reluctant to leave. "Make sure they have everything they need." "Of course," Alex nodded, stepping back. "I'll be around." He watched her weave through the crowd, stopping to chat with an elderly couple, helping a young mother with her children, always in motion, always connecting. It struck him then, with sudden clarity, that Natalie Adams was the heart of this community in many ways, not because of wealth or status, but because she genuinely cared. It was a stark contrast to his own life, where connections were often based on what people could do for each other, where relationships were strategic alliances rather than genuine bonds. The realization left him feeling both hollow and hungry, hollow for what he had been missing, hungry for something more authentic. As the evening wound down, Alex helped with the cleanup, working alongside locals who seemed to have accepted him as one of their own, at least for the night. Natalie caught his eye occasionally across the pavilion, her smile warming him more than the summer night. When most people had left and the area was nearly restored to its original state, she approached him again. "Walk me home?" she asked. "It's not far. And it's a beautiful night." They strolled along the lake shore, the water reflecting the moon and stars above. The conversation flowed easily between them, touching on books they both loved, places they'd traveled, simple pleasures they enjoyed. Natalie's home turned out to be a charming cottage a short distance from town, with a garden that was clearly loved and tended with care. "This is me," she said, stopping at the gate. "Thank you for the company." "Thank you for including me tonight," Alex replied, suddenly reluctant to say goodnight. "I had a good time." She studied him in the moonlight, her expression thoughtful. "You know, Martin, for someone who claims to be taking a break from life, you seem like you're just starting to live it." The observation hit closer to home than she could have known. "Maybe you're right." She hesitated, then reached up and touched his cheek lightly. "Good night, mysterious Martin Lewis. I'll see you at the café." "Good night, Natalie." He walked back to his car, his mind and heart full of contradictions. He had come to Pleasant Ridge to escape, to hide from the world and recover from the constant pressure of being Alexander Mercer. Instead, he was being drawn into a new world, Natalie's world, and finding parts of himself he had forgotten existed. It was dangerous, this growing connection. Dangerous because it was based on a lie. Dangerous because it would have to end when his 3 months were up. Dangerous because, for the first time in years, Alexander Mercer was starting to care about someone in a way that had nothing to do with business or reputation or strategic advantage. That night, lying awake in his rented house, Alex faced an uncomfortable truth. He was falling for Natalie Adams, and she was falling for a man who didn't exist. The following weeks brought a deepening of their connection. Alex continued his daily visits to the Book and Bean, but now he often stayed until closing, helping Natalie clean up before they went for walks around town or shared dinner at one of Pleasant Ridge's few restaurants. He learned that she had inherited the café from her grandmother, who had raised her after her parents died in a car accident when she was 12. He discovered her passion for literature, her dream of someday writing a children's book, her habit of humming when she was happy and twisting her hair when she was nervous. In turn, he shared carefully edited versions of his own life, his childhood in Connecticut. True. His love of hiking and sailing. True. His career in business consulting that allowed him to work remotely. A creative interpretation of the truth. He found himself revealing more personal truths than he had intended: his strained relationship with his father, his fondness for classic films, his secret wish that he had studied marine biology instead of business. The more time they spent together, the more natural it felt. Natalie never pushed for details he wasn't ready to share, accepting his vague explanations with a knowing look that suggested she understood there was more to his story than he was telling. "You know," she said one evening as they sat on her porch swing, watching fireflies dance in her garden. "You're different from when you first arrived." "How so?" "You're more relaxed. When you first came into the cafe, you had this tension about you, like you were constantly on alert. Now you seem more comfortable in your own skin." Alex considered her observation. "I feel more like myself here," he admitted, which is ironic, considering. He stopped, realizing he had nearly revealed too much. "Considering what?" Natalie prompted. "Considering I'm so far from my normal life," he finished, the half-truth feeling bitter on his tongue. She studied him, her hazel eyes seeing more than he wanted them to. "Martin, I don't know what you're running from, and I don't need to know, but I hope you know you can trust me." The guilt that had been simmering within him intensified. "It's not about trust, Natalie. It's complicated." Life usually is, she replied, echoing her words from weeks before. Then, with characteristic directness, she added, I'm falling for you, you know. Complicated or not. The simple honesty of her statement took his breath away. Natalie, you don't have to say anything, she interrupted. I'm not asking for declarations or promises. I'm just putting it out there. I like you. A lot. And I think you like me too. I do, he said softly, the understatement of the century. More than you know. She smiled, leaning her head against his shoulder. Good. That's a start. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the weight of unspoken truths hanging between them. Alex knew he was approaching a crossroads. His feelings for Natalie had grown far beyond what he had ever anticipated when he arrived in Pleasant Ridge. She had become essential to him, her smile, her laughter, her unwavering authenticity. But their relationship was built on a foundation of half-truths and omissions. The longer he waited to tell her the truth about who he was, the more difficult it would become. The opportunity to come clean presented itself unexpectedly the following week. They were having dinner at the lakeside restaurant, a cozy place with excellent local trout, when Natalie's phone chimed with a notification. Sorry, she said, glancing at the screen. I usually silence it, but I'm expecting a message about a book delivery. Her expression changed as she read whatever had appeared on her screen, a small frown creasing her forehead. Everything okay? Alex asked. Yeah, it's just weird. She put her phone down. My friend Lisa sent me a link to some gossip article. She said the guy in it reminds her of you. Alex's heart rate accelerated. Oh? Yeah. Some billionaire who disappeared from public view after a scandal. She laughed lightly. As if you could be a secret billionaire hiding out in Pleasant Ridge. The moment had arrived sooner than he had planned, but perhaps it was for the best. Natalie, there's something I need to tell you. She must have heard the seriousness in his tone because her smile faded. What is it? Not here, he said, looking around at the other diners. Can we go somewhere more private? They paid their bill and walked in silence to a quiet spot along the lakeshore. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the water. Alex took a deep breath, gathering his courage. The article your friend sent you, he began. Was it about Alexander Mercer? Natalie's eyes widened slightly. Yes. How did you know that? Because I'm Alexander Mercer. The words hung in the air between them. Natalie stared at him, confusion and disbelief warring in her expression. What are you talking about? My real name is Alexander Mercer. I'm the CEO of Mercer Enterprises. I came to Pleasant Ridge to escape a PR disaster, a false story sold to the tabloids by someone I briefly dated. My team thought it best if I disappeared for a while until they could contain the damage. Natalie took a step back, her arms crossing over her chest. So, everything you told me, about being a writer, about your life, it was all a lie? Not everything, Alex said quickly. Many of the personal things I shared were true. My childhood, my interests, my feelings. He reached for her hand, but she pulled away. Especially my feelings for you, Natalie. Those are completely real. She shook her head, her expression hardening. How am I supposed to believe that? You've been lying to me since the day we met. I didn't plan for this to happen, he tried to explain. I came here to be anonymous, to escape from my life for a while. I never expected to meet someone like you, to feel this way about anyone. And what way is that exactly? She challenged. I'm falling in love with you, he admitted, the words coming from a place of raw honesty he rarely accessed. That's the truth, Natalie, the only thing that matters. She was quiet for a long moment, processing his revelation. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady but distant. I need time to think about this, Alexander. Or Martin. or whoever you actually are. I understand, he said, though his heart was sinking. Take all the time you need. Good night, she said simply, turning and walking away, her back straight and shoulders tense. Alex watched her go, the weight of his deception pressing down on him like a physical burden. He had known this moment would come, had anticipated that she might be hurt or angry. But he hadn't fully prepared himself for the loss he felt as she walked away, as if something precious and irreplaceable was slipping through his fingers. The following days were some of the loneliest of Alex's life. Natalie didn't contact him, and when he went to the Book and Bean, he found a closed for renovation sign on the door. He drove past her cottage a few times but couldn't bring himself to knock. She had asked for time, and he needed to respect that. Instead, he threw himself into hiking, pushing his body to exhaustion on the mountain trails each day. At night, he sat on his deck, staring at the lake and wondering how he had managed to mess up the one genuine connection he had made in years. On the 5th day after his revelation, there was a knock at his door. When he opened it, Natalie was standing there, looking determined and a little nervous. "Can I come in?" she asked. "Of course." Alex stepped aside, his heart racing. She walked into his living room, taking in the space with new eyes now knowing it was rented by a billionaire rather than a struggling writer. "I've been doing some research," she said, turning to face him. "About Alexander Mercer. Find anything interesting?" "Quite a bit, actually. You've built an impressive company. Your technology has helped millions of people. You fund educational initiatives for underprivileged kids. You're known for ethical business practices." She paused. "You're also known for being intensely private, despite your public role." "All true," Alex confirmed, hope beginning to stir within him. "I also read about the scandal that sent you into hiding. It's pretty clear the story was fabricated. Your former friend has a history of similar claims against wealthy men." "Also true." Natalie took a deep breath. "Here's what I don't understand. Why maintain the lie with me for so long? Once we started getting close, why not trust me with the truth?" It was a fair question, one he had been asking himself repeatedly over the past 5 days. "At first, it was simpler to keep my cover story consistent," he explained. "But as we got closer, I was afraid, Natalie. Afraid that knowing who I really am would change how you saw me. In my experience, people treat Alexander Mercer very differently than they treat Martin Lewis." "You didn't trust me to see past your bank account?" There was hurt in her question. "It wasn't about trust. It was about preserving what we had. When I'm with you, I'm not the CEO or the public figure or the billionaire. I'm just a man who's happier and more at peace than he's been in years. I was afraid to lose that." Natalie considered his words, her expression softening slightly. "I understand being afraid of losing something precious, but relationships can't survive without honesty, Alex. No matter how good the intentions behind the deception." "I know that now," he admitted, "and I'm sorry. I should have trusted you with the truth sooner." She moved closer, studying his face. "So, Alexander Mercer, now that I know who you really are, what happens next? You'll be returning to your real life soon. Where does that leave us?" The question cut to the heart of the matter. His 3 months in Pleasant Ridge were more than half over. Soon he would need to return to New York, to Mercer Enterprises, to the life he had temporarily abandoned. "That depends on what you want, Natalie. My feelings for you haven't changed. If anything, they've grown stronger through this difficult time apart. And my feelings for you are complicated but still very much present," she admitted. "But I live here. My life, my business, my community, they're all here in Pleasant Ridge. And your life is in New York." "It doesn't have to be an either-or situation," Alex said, taking her hands in his. "We could find a way to make it work. I could spend more time here. You could visit New York. We could figure it out together. A small smile curved Natalie's lips. Are you always this optimistic about logistical challenges? Only when they stand between me and something I desperately want, he replied honestly. And what is it you desperately want, Alex? You, he said simply. A chance for us, for something real. She studied him for a long moment, as if trying to read the truth in his eyes. Whatever she saw there must have satisfied her, because she stepped closer, her hands coming up to rest on his chest. I'm willing to try if you are, she said softly. But no more lies, no more half-truths. I need to know the real Alexander Mercer. The real Alexander Mercer is right here, he promised, drawing her into his arms, and he's completely, utterly falling in love with you. Their kiss was both a reconciliation and a new beginning, tender at first, then deepening with the relief of barriers finally broken down. When they eventually separated, Natalie was smiling, though her eyes remained serious. This won't be easy, she warned. Few things worth having are, he replied. But I'm not afraid of challenges. Not anymore. Over the following weeks, they began the delicate process of building a relationship based on complete honesty. Alex shared the details of his life in New York, the pressures of running a global company, the isolation of extreme wealth, the constant scrutiny that had driven him to seek refuge in Pleasant Ridge. Natalie, in turn, opened up about her fears and insecurities, her concern that her small-town life might seem insignificant compared to his world, her worry about fitting into his high-powered circles, her determination to maintain her independence and identity. They navigated these conversations with care and respect, finding compromises and shared visions for a future that neither had anticipated when Alex first walked into the Book and Bean. As his scheduled departure date approached, they faced the reality of their situation with open eyes. Alex had responsibilities in New York that couldn't be ignored indefinitely. Natalie had her café and community in Pleasant Ridge. I've been thinking, Alex said one evening as they sat by the fire in his rented house. What would you think about expanding the Book and Bean? Natalie looked up from the book she was reading. Expanding how? You've mentioned wanting to offer more literary events, maybe add a larger selection of books. What if you had the resources to do that? To create the bookstore cafe you've always dreamed of? Her eyes narrowed slightly. Are you offering to invest in my business? I'm offering to support your vision, he clarified. However that looks. If you want a silent investor, I can be that. If you want a partner in planning the expansion, I can be that too. And this would be separate from our relationship? She asked, always direct. Not a way of keeping me financially tied to you? Completely separate, he assured her. I respect your independence, Natalie. This is about believing in what you've built and wanting to see it grow. She considered his offer, her practical nature evident in her thoughtful expression. I'd need to think about it. Make sure it makes sense for the business and for me. Of course. No pressure, no timeline. She smiled then, setting her book aside and moving to sit beside him on the couch. You know, for a billionaire CEO, you're surprisingly respectful of boundaries. Only with people who matter, he replied, drawing her closer. And you, Natalie Adams, matter more than anyone ever has. The night before Alex was scheduled to return to New York, they had dinner at his house, the atmosphere bittersweet with impending separation. It's only for 2 weeks, Alex reminded her. Just long enough for me to reorganize some things at the office and set up a more flexible work arrangement. I know, Natalie said, her fingers laced with his across the table. It's just, I've gotten used to seeing you every day. Me too. The thought of returning to his penthouse, once his sanctuary, now just an empty space, held little appeal. But we'll talk every day, and before you know it, I'll be back. With photographers and reporters following you? She asked, voicing a concern they had discussed before. Not if I can help it, he promised. My team is working on managing my return in a way that minimizes media attention. And Pleasant Ridge is still off their radar. They spent their last night together talking late into the night, making plans for the coming months, a balance of time in New York and Pleasant Ridge, a gradual integration of their separate lives. When morning came, their goodbye was emotional but hopeful. This isn't an ending, Alex said, holding her close at the small airport where his private jet waited. It's just the beginning of something different. I'm holding you to that, Natalie replied, reaching up to touch his face. Go run your empire, Alexander Mercer. Then come back to me. Always, he promised, kissing her one last time before boarding the plane. The return to New York was as jarring as Alex had anticipated. The noise, the pace, the constant demands on his attention all felt amplified after the peace of Pleasant Ridge. His executive team welcomed him back with a mixture of relief and curiosity, tactfully avoiding direct questions about his time away. His PR team had done an excellent job of managing the scandal in his absence. The woman who had sold the false story had been discredited when similar claims against other wealthy men had proven fabricated, and public interest had moved on to fresher controversies. Alex threw himself into work with renewed focus, determined to streamline operations and delegate responsibilities in a way that would allow him more time away from the New York office. His team noticed the change in his management style, more decisive, less micromanaging, but attributed it to his time for reflection rather than the influence of a small-town cafe owner who had changed his perspective on what truly mattered. He spoke to Natalie every evening, their conversations bridging the physical distance between them. He described his meetings, the challenges of re-establishing his public presence, the progress on his reorganization plans. She shared stories from the Book and Bean, updates on local gossip, and her tentative ideas for the cafe's expansion. On the 10th day of their separation, Alex was in a board meeting when his phone vibrated with a message from Natalie. Normally, he would never check his phone during such an important meeting, but something compelled him to glance at the screen. The message was simple. Missing you more than expected. Maybe New York needs a Book and Bean branch? The suggestion, even if meant lightly, sparked something in Alex's mind. He found himself distracted for the remainder of the meeting, an idea taking shape that might solve their geographical dilemma in a way he hadn't considered before. That evening, instead of their usual phone call, he surprised Natalie with a video call. "I've been thinking about your message," he said after they had caught up on their day. "It was just a joke," she laughed. "I can't imagine a New York version of my little cafe." But what if it wasn't a joke? Alex leaned forward, his excitement evident. What if the Book and Bean could be more than one location? What if we created a small chain of bookstore cafes with the same values, the same atmosphere, but in carefully selected communities? Natalie's expression shifted from amusement to consideration. "You mean franchise the Book and Bean?" "Not exactly. More like expanding your vision. Each location would maintain the personal touch, the community focus. But you could bring that special quality, what makes your cafe more than just a place to buy coffee, and books to other communities that would value it." "That's a big idea," she said, clearly trying to process the concept. "Much bigger than the modest expansion I was considering." "It could start small," he assured her. "Maybe one additional location. Perhaps in a town near New York, where I could be based part of the time while still being close to the office when needed. And I would..." "What? Divide my time between locations?" "If you wanted to. Or we could find managers who share your vision, who you could train and mentor. You'd be the creative director, the heart of the brand, while having the freedom to decide how hands-on you want to be with each location." Natalie was quiet for a moment, considering. This feels like a solution to more than just a business question, Alex. It is, he admitted. It's about finding a way for our lives to intertwine without either of us having to abandon what matters to us. Your community connection, my business responsibilities both honored, both preserved. I'd need to think about it, she said, but he could see the spark of interest in her eyes. It's not a small undertaking. Take all the time you need. I'm not going anywhere. He paused, then added softly, except back to Pleasant Ridge in 4 days, as planned. Her smile at that reminder was all the confirmation he needed that, whatever form their future took, they were on the right path. 4 days later, when Alex's jet touched down at the small Pleasant Ridge airport, Natalie was waiting on the tarmac. The sight of her windswept hair, beaming smile, arms open wide made his heart swell with an emotion he had once been too guarded to acknowledge. He barely waited for the stairs to be secured before rushing down to sweep her into his arms, lifting her off her feet in an embrace that expressed everything words couldn't capture. "Welcome back," she murmured against his neck. "It feels like coming home," he replied, realizing the truth of it as he spoke. Home wasn't his New York penthouse or even the rented lakeside house. Home was here, with Natalie, in this unexpected place where he had found himself again. Over the following months, their vision for the future took shape. Natalie decided to start with a modest expansion of the original Book and Bean, adding a larger book selection and a small event space for readings and community gatherings. Alex provided the capital but respected her insistence on maintaining creative control. They established a pattern of splitting their time between Pleasant Ridge and New York. Alex set up a satellite office in a nearby city, allowing him to work remotely while still making occasional trips to corporate headquarters. Natalie began exploring potential locations for a second Book and Bean, focusing on communities that reminded her of Pleasant Ridge places where a café bookstore could become a genuine gathering spot rather than just another business. Their relationship deepened as they navigated the challenges of blending their different worlds. Alex introduced Natalie to his closest friends and trusted colleagues, relieved when they recognized and respected the qualities that had drawn him to her. Natalie helped Alex become a part of the Pleasant Ridge community, where he was gradually accepted as himself rather than his billionaire persona. 1 year after Alex first arrived in Pleasant Ridge, they stood together on the deck of what was now their permanent home, the lakeside house he had initially rented, purchased, and renovated to reflect both their tastes. "Hard to believe it's been a year," Natalie said, leaning back against his chest as they watched the sunset over the lake. "The best year of my life," Alex replied, his arms tightening around her waist. "Even with all the complications? The commuting? The media attention when they finally discovered your secret small-town romance? My disastrous first attempt at a corporate dinner party?" He laughed, remembering her horrified expression when she had accidentally spilled wine on a potential investor. "Especially with all the complications. They're part of our story." She turned in his arms to face him. "Speaking of our story, have you given any more thought to what we discussed last month?" The discussion had been about their future specifically, about marriage, and potentially starting a family. Both were steps Alex had never seriously considered before Natalie entered his life. "I have," he said, reaching into his pocket. "And I've come to a decision." Her eyes widened as he produced a small velvet box. "Natalie Adams, you found me when I was hiding from the world and showed me what it means to live authentically. You challenged me, accepted me, and loved me not for my wealth or status, but for who I am beneath all of that." He opened the box, revealing a diamond ring that managed to be both elegant and understated, much like Natalie herself. "Will you marry me?" Tears filled her eyes as she nodded. "Yes. Absolutely yes." As he slipped the ring onto her finger, Alex reflected on the strange, beautiful journey that had brought them to this moment. He had come to Pleasant Ridge to escape his reputation, to find solitude and anonymity. Instead, he had found the one person who saw beyond the billionaire to the man he truly was, and in doing so, had found himself as well. Their wedding, held the following spring, reflected the merging of their worlds. The ceremony took place in Pleasant Ridge's town park, with the lake and mountains as their backdrop. The guest list included local café regulars alongside Fortune 500 CEOs, all coming together to celebrate a union that had begun with a man seeking to escape and a woman who had helped him find his way home instead. Alexander Mercer had fled to Pleasant Ridge to hide from the world. What he discovered there in a small cafe run by a remarkable woman was that sometimes the things we run from are not nearly as important as what we run toward. In seeking anonymity, he had found authenticity. In trying to escape his reputation, he had found the one person who cared nothing for it, who saw and loved the man behind the billions. And in that discovery lay the greatest fortune of all.